Let's go ahead and move on to your number 8.
Cool. So my number 8 was a game that was new to Steam, UFO Online Invasion. And this one, it's definitely nostalgia for me, just getting like the whole Stalker vibe from it, because it's so clearly influenced by it, but done in a new twist though. I thought it was really well done. Sure, it's a little rough around the edges. It's definitely nothing to write home about graphically, but I feel like just the gameplay is there, and the fact again that you can play at least some of the instances with players is definitely a plus for me.
I know I personally have definitely spent a lot of time with that game because the tutorial for it is quite extensive, and you have to play for quite some time before you get the opportunity to play with other people. I think I had about 5 hours in that game before we were actually able to group up in any meaningful capacity. I think for me, the only thing that really hurts that game is that you can't do more things cooperatively in it. I think if there were more options to do like regular missions and just any task you wanted to do in the game cooperatively, that would be a game that I'd probably still actively be playing a lot more of. It's just an unfortunate design limitation of the game that there are only certain missions that are designated as co-op. And it's actually something I've talked to the development team about via the forums. I actually got responses from developers about it, and I think it is something that they're actually looking at based on that feedback. Even as the game currently stands and as it currently sits, I do think if co-op isn't important to you and you're just looking for like a cool, kind of interesting, kind of different turn-based strategy experience, I think that game certainly has a lot to offer. So, having said that, why don't you go ahead and pick our next destination?
Yes. Well, I think going by what we know, this room should be safe. Oh, yeah, I gotta watch out for... Because the death room was blue. Yes, okay. Whew.
Okay, so here we have a sort of pinkish purple. They call it purple. I think it looks kind of pink. Which means there are traps in 3 directions from this room. So we know one of these other doors is going to be safe. So that's good to know. But before I figure out which way we're actually going to go with this, let's talk about game number 7. So for me, this is going to be probably a bit of a controversial pick. But I thought about it long and hard, and I decided that for whatever issues I have with this game, it was still a game that deserved to be on my list, and that is Tom Clancy's The Division, which I think kind of has set a precedent in my mind in a lot of ways for the big AAA $60 game that kind of just barely justifies itself from a financial investment standpoint. But even having said that, it's still a game that for me I got enough enjoyment out of and had enough fun with, and think enough was done to it, especially with a particular patch that came out post-release, to make the game worthy enough or just worthy enough to land on this list. Again, as we've said a few times already, co-op kind of makes everything better. But I'm kind of curious to hear your thoughts on its inclusion here.
It's one of those games where if they would have just waited another year so it would get into the state that it's currently in, like right now, I think I would have had a much favorable opinion of it. The thing that just annoyed me was that I felt more like a beta tester rather than having like the full blown product when it came out. It's still very fun, and I can't take that away from it. It still looks incredible. Like, graphically, that game is very, very nice to look at. Gameplay could get stale, but at the same time, that being said, the game that is incredibly similar to it, being Defiance, is very much the same way, where it's just kind of like, all right, you know, you're going to go around with a group of friends, and you're going to shoot and kill a bunch of stuff. You know, and that's not a very bad formula, especially if you execute it well, and I still think The Division does that.
I think for me, to kind of sum it up, if you were to release that game today and have the content that's in the underground expansion included in the base game and have the game in the sort of refined functional state that it's in as of the recording of this video, that would have been a much more impressive game. And then you could have taken from that impressive foundation with the randomized dungeons and the high value targets and all that stuff being built into the core game, and then started building DLC and stuff on top of that. Having said that, why don't you hit me with your number 7?
Alright, so my number 7 was Grim Dawn.
Nice.
Yeah. Again, just really solid top-down action RPG. Definitely would recommend it for those of you who are already familiar with that sort of thing. So, like, if you were a fan of Torchlight 2 or something along those lines, I couldn't recommend it more, really.
If you're a fan of that genre and you haven't played that game, like, what are you doing with your life? It's basically what it boils down to. Okay, so having said all that, I have no shoes. So I may request that you assist me in determining which one of these rooms is safe, if you're cool with that.
Okay.
I'm going to trigger the door first, and we'll see if there's a door trap here.
There is not.
Okay. Would you mind hucking a Nike in there? Alright, so that is the safe one. I'm going to count myself lucky and take that and call that a win. As you can see here, we have another green room, so we know only one of these directions is a trap. So that puts us in actually a pretty good spot moving forward. But before I let you make that call, let's talk about number 6. So my number 6 is actually this game, Half Dead. Ironically, I knew I was going to have to make this transition at some point to talking about the game that we're actually playing, and even having thought about it in advance, I still made that incredibly awkward, so good on me. But moving beyond that, I have to say, I think this game is a really easy game to dismiss or to overlook or to maybe not give its due or its credit. But I think when you really stop and think about what this game represents in terms of taking a game done in the 3D first-person style that isn't a shooter, that isn't an action game, and actually making something... This game is very difficult to classify in a lot of ways. It's very simple to a certain extent, this whole premise of just wandering through this maze and trying to make your way to the exit without dying. But at the same time, if you compare this to a lot of the other games on this list, from an originality standpoint, I think this game does a lot of really cool things to kind of differentiate itself from the norm of what we kind of come to expect from gaming. Now, I know there will be people who say, oh, duh, have you never seen the movie Cube? Which is obviously, you could say, would be a direct inspiration for something like this. But even with that, you'd have to acknowledge that nobody's really made a game like this before. That's something worth pointing out.
This is such an easy pick, because this game does so much right. And again, it's the whole, it's so simple, but until somebody actually does it, how simple can it be, right? And from the price point, which is what, like $2? Like, this game is $2.
$2 as of launch, yep.
It's cooperative, and it's just hella fun. It really is, especially when you crank the difficulty up, when you crank the room count up. You're just running around with 4 or 5 people. You're throwing shoes into rooms. You're trying to find the exit desperately. Like, just that whole, like, metagame in it of itself is so much fun. It's something that you really have to play to appreciate what this game is really bringing to the table. Especially, again, like you said, from the whole first-person perspective, this could have easily turned into another, like, action game, or they could have put in weapons or whatever, but I wish it just got more recognition for what it's doing.